when the ESPN was founded, I was responsible for the nephrology, pediatric nephrology, in the university clinic in Ghent. The department had a certain reputation in this field, mainly because of the chief of the department, Professor Hoofd, and worked mainly on nephrotic syndrome, different aspects of nephrotic syndrome, such as the long-term evolution, or certain symptoms. The treatment of the nephrotic syndrome at that moment consisted mainly and only recently of ACTH and later on corticosteroids. But there was not yet the real biopsies as we know it later on. I was invited to come to Glasgow in '67 by Governor Neil because Professor Hoofd asked me to go, as I was responsible for the nephrology in the department. What I remember is that it was a rather restricted company, very informal, and I guess there were about 40, perhaps 50 participants at this first meeting. What was discussed there was the papers that were presented were mainly on what one was doing at that moment in his department, her department. So I talked about the long-term evolution of nephrotic syndrome in children. Part of it was about treated children with ACTH and corticosteroids. Others had not been treated at all, and we compared both groups. At that meeting, there was the structure and the organization of the ESPN was discussed and fixed. As far as I can remember, ESPN was relatively early compared to other associations on pediatric subspecialties. What I remember is that there was a certain predominance of physiopathology, and I believe that was due to the fact that there were relatively, I believe, 5 or 6 people who had been trained in the USA in the same department, Cornell University, and that was dominating the meetings. At least that is what I remember of the meeting. What happened after Glasgow, I can't remember very well. It's such a long time ago. But what I know is that each year a few members, new members, were proposed and accepted most of the time. And I saw an increase of the society. What I also noted is that in pediatric nephrology, certain aspects came into prominence. After some years, renal biopsy, much later, transplantation, and that is what I witnessed during all these years, that more and more aspects were developed. What I would like to stress is that from the beginning, countries from Eastern Europe were also involved and were helped to come to these meetings. And this went on during many years. It was not always easy, but it worked. After some years, I can't remember how many, but after some years there were contacts with the American Society of Paediatric Nephrology, which resulted in the IPNA meetings, in the foundation of IPNA, and the meetings later on. I also remember that we tried to have a journal of the ESPN. It was Giordano who tried to organize this, but again, as far as I can remember, there were too much organizational and financial problems, and I don't believe it came to a good end. When you ask me what a Secretary General had to do, it was not very much at that time. Probably it's not the same anymore, but we had to to summarize the annual meetings, send the invitations, and again, I'm not completely sure, but I think that we were also responsible for financial aspects. And that is about all I can tell about the ESPN, which I left many, many years ago. In the 80s, I organized one of the meetings of the ESPN here in Antwerp. It was the first time that the meetings lasted for 4 days. I thought there were so many subjects to be treated that 3 days would not suffice. And therefore I tried 4 days. But this was not really a success. And what I decided was, what we decided was to stick to the 3 days, even if there are many subjects, and to organize simultaneous sessions. But the meeting in itself was a big success.